It's an honor to be with you here in this final panel. All of you have spoken already today, and I believe have inspired many of us with your insights and wisdom and generosity of being here with us. Now, in this closing panel, we would like to look forward and turn to questions and issues about Armenia and the diaspora in the future. And to stimulate this conversation, I have a set of questions I would like, and to begin with, I'd like to begin with asking just each of you to respond in the context of your own responsibilities and work and passions. What beyond money do you need most in support from the diaspora? Bishop?
I think I have already mentioned in my presentation that we need human resources, human presence, and money is the last thing that we can talk about. We need the participation and time and talent investment from diaspora, experience, and just to be physically present in Armenia, in the life of the people in Armenia.
That's a very high expectation, but in fact,
yes,
it is an important one.
One of the things that maybe as the continuation is the knowledge and experience. The diaspora is very much represented in different countries of the world. And the experience and the knowledge that diaspora has can be very much helpful. And we also should shift from this financial thinking way, putting financial on the first place. We should define the problem or the challenge. And when you define the problem and challenge and going to solve it, financial problems sometimes becomes the last one. It's important, we don't deny. But if the thinking way is you don't put financial on the first place, you succeed more.
So if I may follow up on that, once again, it's a continuation. So how do you draw then the diaspora in? What is it that you can be doing to bring them to these issues?
One of the examples can be, and just for yesterday we were at JPL. There's 300 people, Armenians working there. And Armenia now we are trying to develop the space industry. So this knowledge and experience can be very much helpful. It can be diasporans who are coming back to Armenia to work in this industry, or it can be knowledge or experience that can be through training shared with us.
To answer the first question or the second?
No, the first question is back on what can the diaspora do to support the things you think are important?
Well, to spend some money.
Spend some money. We are back on money. That's not bad.
But not in pecuniary form. Which I mean, time is money. So the most important thing is engagement. Engagement. When they engage and take Armenia as an opportunity place, when they think about Armenia as somewhere that opportunities are there and they can be utilized, everything else will follow. I'm not talking about identity and many other issues. I'm just trying to take from just economic engagement viewpoint. And this is very important if they are going to be there. It is to understand that if you are going to do business, it's the same in Armenia or in Mexico or somewhere else. You have to spend time, dedication. You have to more structure the problem rather than finance it. Because if you have a perfect solution, finance is much easier problem. But it is again time and effort, and it translates into money, into other things. So the most important thing is engagement and physical presence, as Mazmanian said. So from this perspective, it is extremely important. What we can do is to create environment that is understandable for them, because there are different discourses in different countries, different environment. And generally, Armenians have been very good in translating things. We have survived on the tectonic plates of civilizations empires, cultures, religions, too many things. And as a result, we know how to translate. Now it is very important to translate experiences of US Armenians, French Armenians, Armenia's population into something that is understandable for everybody, so that they feel at home and understand that there are possibilities to take and pursue opportunities here.
Thank you. Well, not to reiterate what already has been mentioned about knowledge and experience and human capital, I want to also put it in a perspective and also bring it home to Armenia as to how we can do that. Our portfolio in our ministry is quite wide, and we've already have capitalized from the knowledge in the diaspora when addressing and trying to find solutions to the existing problems, particularly in forestry. Armenia has taken a very ambitious commitment of doubling its forest cover by 2050, but we don't have the capacity and the knowledge and the money to do that. So we aim to bring the knowledge, experience, and funds from all over the world, from diasporas of Armenians spread around the world, and we've already have benefited from communicating that message. And when I talk about message, it brings me to the second point, that what we need from the diaspora is knowing about Armenia. And I think it's a two-way street. We need to communicate better as to what challenges we have and how we can solve it together. And I think the recent reform, institutional reform within the government of transitioning it from a ministry of diaspora, whereby diaspora was seen as this amorphous entity, to a high commissioner, which will be the coordinating figure in the government to bring these important connections to different ministries, whereby every ministry will be responsible to put together an agenda to work with diaspora. This is important because, as I said, we have immense challenges, and we do need the human capital, the experience, the knowledge that it has been generated for generations in the diaspora, and we can certainly draw from that experience. But to do that, we need to properly communicate and build important bridges. And in that respect, we're designing this still conceptually, but putting slowly it into a more articulate form, the idea of having climate and environment ambassadors in Armenian diaspora. Because as you know, climate and environment have become a priority agendas in the global discourse, in the global political action. And as we try to properly identify and find solutions to climate and environment challenges in Armenia, we need to draw these connections, and also we need to have spokespeople in the diaspora for those, and we welcome the communication and the messaging that's so important.
Any other comments? I want to say, as I'm listening to this, it makes an awful lot of sense to me that the first issue, the first challenge is defining an issues that others can relate to from the diaspora. And of course, that's an internal issue, and I know you're all very busy with your everyday activities within your own organization and industries and ministries. And yet, you're saying that what needs to be done is really you mentioned a two-way street, which is articulation of the need. I hear some of it already, but articulation in a way that reaches across cultures, not just within Armenia, but where the diaspora is, to bring them back in. And that's a very important point, I think, for all of us to take away, which is, many I know in my own conversations here believe they have skills that could be useful, but they don't know where or how to fit them in. So I think that that's an important thing for both the diaspora and those working in Armenia to work on as the future. So that's, I think, one of the things, I guess, will be a takeaway from our conference, which is important. A second question, which is how best can the generous resources from the diaspora for specific projects, several of which have already been mentioned, be they schools or healthcare or environment or security or church, how can these specifics be expanded and better incorporated into the ongoing culture and religion and administrative institutions of Armenia?
Let's start from the other end.
Okay.
Ladies first.
Thank you for the question, which is organic continuation from the first question. Well, I think we need to realize that a successful solution, designing a successful solution and implementing it comes from engagement of all the stakeholders. So in that respect, whether it's private sector, whether it's government or civil society, we all need to work in synergy. And with that in mind, when we talk about specific projects, again, the communication and coordination is very important. So one of the things that we started doing also institutionally in the government is consolidating a lot of institutions that were spread out under one umbrella and under one institution so that we become more efficient and more effective. And I believe the same thing has to happen in private sector, the same thing has to happen in civil society, as well as in diaspora. And for us to communicate more efficiently and effectively, I think we need to also start thinking that beyond traditional diasporic institutions, what are the platforms that we can bring diasporan Armenians that have variety of identities, that are interested in variety of things, at platforms where we can coordinate our actions and act in synergies, because once we have these types of platforms, solving problems will become a lot more effective, because we all do know that Armenian nation, global nation, has an incredible untapped resource of ingenuity. It's just we fail continuously at bringing it all together and on a same platform and work in synergies. So not to take too much of my time, I think one of the important things that we need to keep in mind is close coordination and looking for partners when implementing given projects that we have.
Very helpful. Others? Gentlemen, lady go first, but gentlemen.
Okay, let me follow to the ideas that was said. Actually, when we are trying to identify problems and think of solutions, sometimes that's the place when we can also think about the diaspora and think about how we can engage diaspora in this process. And when there's this mind change that there are spheres or there are problems that can be tackled with the support of the diaspora, and not to think that there are only one way of solution. That's important way, and this is the way that we are thinking, and this is the way that we are trying to find solution of the problems.
I can be quite short. Ensure that every project has proper accountability. And in some cases it can be deep, in some cases it can be less, but if the stakeholders who are participating in it initially talk about accountability of the project, regardless of it's a business endeavor or benevolent one, I believe that it will be much easier to talk about, but it should be done beforehand. And it should be done by clearly communicating to all stakeholders what it is for and what the stakeholders have expectations for.
So it's outreach, communications, but also accountability. And I actually applaud this, because it seems to me that in studying such issues here in the university, we find these are repeatedly the critical factors in cooperating across boundaries, across cultures. So we know this is where Armenia needs to move, and we have to be responsive. A third question, one that in fact is quite prominent here, at least in the United States. I suspect it's prominent worldwide, but let me pose it in the context of Armenia. Within the Armenian society and governance, where you have responsibilities, how best can women be encouraged and cultivated to play a more active role in policymaking and leadership?
I think this afternoon, Dr. Gabrielyan already brought the subject on, and he talked about the women's engagement in Armenia and empowerment, and he even talked about statistics that currently, yes.
Higher education.
And sometimes we have to be very careful, in my opinion, not to make a competition between men and women, and specifically in our society. And I think that we shouldn't always talk and deal with the issue through the light of human rights. Instead, we have to, I'm talking about we have to see them, two sexes and genders, as completing each other instead of competing with each other. And I think Armenia has advanced a lot in empowering women and making them, or creating the environment and the atmosphere to get them engaged more in politics and policy making. Even recently we had lots of women elected in the parliament and in the government, and I think it's gradually moving on, and there is a lot more advancement in that respect. And I think we have done a lot and well in this area.
I have a riddle. I disobeyed my wife by insisting that my daughter chooses her specialty herself. Did I do enough for empowerment of women?
What's your answer? Maybe that's not answerable. Other comments?
Yeah. Actually, I think the role of the woman is really increasing in Armenia. I just can tell during the revolution, the participation of women, especially young women, I think, and it's the consequence of more women graduating from the higher university, their participation was very active. And I remember when we were standing on this floor and looking to this wave of the people, the eyes of the, there were so many young women inspired, and they wanted to bring change, and their participation was very important. But I think the revolution did not fix the consequence that we will have more representatives in the government and also in National Assembly. We have more, but I think we need more. And this is an ongoing process. I think there is a need also a lot of mind change, cultural changes. And what's very important, it's in our agenda, and we are sure that the engagement of women in politics especially, and in other spheres too, that it will bring more success to Armenia.
If I also may add a few points. I think on this question we have to be brutally honest and accept and admit the fact that we are collectively a very patriarchal society, and we devised the social roles very specifically. And as Dr. Gabrielyan earlier mentioned, that women perform and excel in education, yet we don't see them entering workforce in the same percentage. We don't see them entering decision-making positions, policy-making positions in the same pace. And one of the reasons is obviously because child rearing is traditionally placed on women, which is not bad if we think culturally, but we don't give the opportunity for our women to move forward as we socially and culturally condition them. And that also develops within women themselves the sense that they won't be able to make it, they won't be able to cut what it requires from the job. So collectively as a society and a community, we have to work to help women overcome internal doubts that they are not fit for the job. And also collectively, as a community, we have to work to break down the social and cultural stereotypes that Armenian fathers can't equally do the job that Armenian mothers do. This is a work in progress and a work that we have to do, and unfortunately, I do not settle for gradualism. Yes, we're doing better, but not good enough, because if we really collectively as a community commit to bringing women to decision-making positions, to positions in private sector and in civil society, thankfully women have taken that position,
we will benefit culturally, socially, and economically. And the numbers speak for themselves. If we bring women more into the workforce, the economy of Armenia will benefit. So we have a lot of work to do, but to succeed in doing that, we have to be honest, and we all, men and women, have to help each other, particularly women, to break down those barriers and the hindrances within themselves and in our society to help women to get to the top.
I think we've identified a very important issue, which is, of course, looking forward, raises the issue of how to do this. And I appreciate the comments, both in terms of the historical culture, which is receptive, but the realities of today, the changes underway, but the road ahead, which is why we're here. Let me turn to the comment that was made earlier about this being a two-way street on the other side of the street, if you will, and ask the final question about what the diaspora, what Armenia can provide to enhance the experience of the diaspora as a way of connecting Armenia and the diaspora. What can Armenia be? How can Armenia provide resources or feedback, if you will, for the diaspora to accomplish the kinds of things we're talking about? What role does Armenia have in this two-way street?
Speaking from, for example, from my perspective, what's important and what is in our agenda, and we think about this, it's not only think people living in Armenia for their security, but about the security of the Armenians living outside of Armenia. For example, in the case of Middle East, it's in our agenda, and we see that regional conflicts and other issues are challenging Armenian communities. So we are sitting down and thinking how we can be helpful, how Armenia can be helpful to solving those issues, and what is the best way to solve those issues. Is it bringing them back to Armenia or providing some resources to provide their security there? So this is the way we are trying to think about this, how Armenia can be responsible, can be, a giver, also a provider something.
Yes.
It could be service, knowledge, or something else.
That's a good example. Others thinking about this?
Well, I believe that every time that we engage, it's a two-way street. People have multiple identities, and being citizen of the United States and being Armenian at the same time are not contradictory, but in certain circumstances, one identity is playing a more important role, in other circumstances, the other. And for full experience of the Armenian identity, I believe that it cannot be detached from Armenia. So from this perspective, we should be a place that is Armenia as homeland, and not only Armenia as a state, but also we have to remember that there is a state that actually is for all Armenians, as Armen provided the example over there, and there is not a unique, or there is not a unitary or uniform way of experiences. I think they are shared. From the lens of economic development, what I would think of is that very often Armenia can be a testing playground for economic ideas that are too expensive to test in the US. So if you have an idea and if you would like to test it on a smaller scale, maybe perhaps it makes a sense to test it in Armenia. It will be much easier, cheaper, and you'll understand the cultural and economic context much easier than if you were doing the same thing, for example, in Mongolia.
Another excellent idea. Others?
Yeah, it is a very complex, complicated, and sophisticated question. What can Armenia do as a statehood for the diaspora. And the first thing I think we have to properly define, fundamentally define, what do we mean when we speak about Armenia as homeland, and what's the definition of Armenia as statehood. And there is the emotional connection, emotional part of it, and also the intellectual and also investment, engagement part of it. And I think we have to bring these two sides together in harmony and see that where the homeland starts and where the statehood starts, and how these two realities complement each other, and how these two realities on the engagement level can involve more Armenians in the life of Armenia, and vice versa, the Armenian government's support and the engagement in the life of the diaspora. And one more thing just I wanted to mention about is it has to be a kind of conceptual question, whether we want diaspora to perpetuate diaspora, or we are talking about repatriation and have demographic change in Armenia.
Yes.
And I think this afternoon there was, I think Martin Galstanyan was talking about one of the issues that one of the burning issues of Armenia is the demography. And I think it's a fundamental question, and we have to be honestly dealing with that question, whether we want diaspora to perpetuate, to continue, or we want to repatriate, bring the people back into living in Armenia. And I think the rest of the policies and everything else should derive from that the answer to that question.
If I may, just on that one point, because I do see students here at the university who are diaspora-born Armenians, and for them this is probably even a more challenging issue because they are first born here and into this culture. And the question is, do you actually move back to Armenia, or move to Armenia, not back to, move to Armenia as part of this? So I think that it is a compelling issue for which we all have to grapple with, both in Armenia and in the diaspora. And it will depend on the comments made about all the prior questions, it seems to me, about how the extent to which the two can work harmoniously and to the mutual benefit, because I suspect that will be a road to the answer of how this works out. But final.
Thank you. Yes, just to add to very excellent points, I see our nation as a solar constellation. We're a global community with different diasporas. I like to reflect on diasporas, not just diaspora, because we're so different, we're so multi-layered. But then there's one element, the Armenian element, that we constantly fail to define, which is in a way good because there are so many dimensions to being Armenian. And in that solar constellation, Armenia is, in the solar system, Armenia is the sun kind of drawing and radiating that important element of being Armenian, yet not knowing what it really is. Is it speaking Armenian language, having an Armenian last name, knowing who Nare Gatsi is? What is it really? We still haven't been able to define, and perhaps for the good reason. But what is important to remember is that Armenia does help us in sustaining our identity. And what I believe we can utilize Armenia as an independent country in 21st century, a dream that is finally achieved, a dream of our forefathers, of our ancestors to have independent Armenia, is to really capitalize on what we have. We have an independent country to which everyone can relate and associate, whether you live in Far East Russia or whether you live in Italy or anywhere else in the world. We need to capitalize on having independent and sovereign Armenia. And with that,
an important aspect to also mention is one of the perpetual fears existing in different communities around the world, in Armenian communities, is the fear of losing your identity, whatever it is for you, whether it's having your last name changed if you marry, or whether it has to do with not knowing the Armenian language. So how do we overcome that fear is we look towards the radiating sun, towards Armenia, to help us find our identity, whatever it is for you. And as very poignantly Professor Gabrielyan mentioned, Armenia is a land of opportunities. It is indeed, especially now with the political changes that we've had. Come and test your experience, come and test your project. There are so many untapped resources and opportunities in the country. It can certainly be an interesting ground for you to test your idea, to test your business opportunity. And in conclusion, I also wanted to mention that when we draw on our identity, Armenia, as I mentioned earlier in my speech, for us, sometimes in the diasporan community, we think of Armenia as an imaginary place, but it is today a sovereign state. There's so much that our communities around the world can benefit from. And I'll get personal here. I have 3 kids, and one of them was born in the States, 2 were born in Armenia. I travel a lot. My husband is American, so we were constantly moving back and forth, thinking, where do we live? And for me, it was a no-brainer. I wanted to raise my children in Armenia so that they can speak in Armenian, they can think in Armenian, and they can identify themselves with a place that they can bind themselves, so that they can be Armenians that are place-bound and not just place-conscious, where they have Armenia as an imaginary place. Thank you.
So on that, I please join me in thanking the panel for giving us a number of really important ideas in how to think forward on Armenia and the diaspora, and for their contributions throughout the entire Innovate Armenia, and for, in fact, being so generous to be here with us today. Thank you very much.